Hey, my name is Miriam Cutelis, and I'm here to talk to you about Sophie TaeuberArp and share with you 14 elementary art projects based on her life and works. First, let's go with pronunciation of her name, Sophie TaeuberArp. She is one of the pioneers of modern art. What does pioneer mean? Pioneer means being the first one to use or apply. A couple of things about her. She created a visual language. Her work was very animated and joyful. Her work also was very life-affirming. She lived through lots of crises. For example, she lived through 1920s economic crisis, 1918 flu pandemic, and her art does not reflect any of that. She also lived through 2 world wars, World War I and World War II. In World War I, there were 18.5 million casualties. In World War II, there were 40 to 85 million casualties. So interestingly, her work doesn't really reflect the crisis at the time or at which she lived. She's from Switzerland, and people from Switzerland are called Swiss. And here is a map of Europe. Let me give you a closer look. There we go. Switzerland is found right here. It's surrounded by land, and its neighbors are Italy, Austria, Germany, France, and, well, if you want to, Slovenia. This is the Switzerland flag. During World War II and World War I, Switzerland was a neutral country. Switzerland has the oldest policy of military neutrality in the world, which means that it has not participated in a foreign war since its neutrality was established by the Treaty of Paris in 1815. Sophie TaeuberArp was an abstract painter. Let's talk a little bit about what abstract means. Abstract means that the art does not attempt to represent reality, but seeks to achieve its effect using shape, forms, colors, and textures. She attended the school in Munich, which was an interdisciplinary school in Germany. School in Munich was at the forefront of the contemporary endeavors in the art school reform, and the aim was bringing together visual and applied arts together and allowing them to flow directly into the concerns of daily life. Let's go back and talk a little bit about what the differences between visual art and applied arts. The visual arts are like paintings and drawings, and the focus is only on appearance. With applied arts, the focus is also on appearance, but it is sold, and most importantly, it's useful, such as a chair or a vase. She created a vocabulary of motifs, and a motif is just a decorative design or a pattern. Here are some examples of her motifs, which brings us to our first activity. Our first activity will be creating our own or inventing our own motif. So for this, you will need a pencil, you will need scissors, and some type of glue. And it's easier if you have a glue stick, but you can use any type of glue. So what you're going to do is cut an imaginary shape. That can be a shape like that reminds you of something, or it can be an invented shape that has no name. And it can be a slightly buried form or a shape that already has a name. So it can maybe look like a heart, but maybe has a little bit on one side, could be bigger. So it can be something that's somewhat recognizable and it might remind you of something. Like I said, it can be a simplified form of a more complex shape that you already know. The step 2 is you're going to trace the shape 3 times on different colored paper. Then you're going to cut them out and arrange them on a separate piece of paper until it feels balanced to you. Again, what will feel balanced to you might be different what feels balanced for someone else. And then glue down your shapes. And here you have invented and worked with your own motif to create a balanced artwork similar to the process by which Sophie TaeuberArp might have when she created her own motifs and use them to create her patterns.
So let's get started. So here I am drawing a shape that reminds me of an animal, not necessarily a specific animal, just a random animal with perhaps 4 legs. On this one, it's going to be simplified, so it's a profile of an animal, so you're only going to see 2 legs. I'm going to cut it out, and remember, since we're going to be repeating this motif, I got 2 other pieces of paper that are slightly different. You can trace it, or you can just hold the piece on top and cut around it, so then you'll have 3 shapes that are identical. Okay, now we're going to get our paper that we're going to use to glue our images on. I'm going to make it a little smaller so that all the pieces fit and fill the space. And then I'm going to play around with composition, move pieces around and see what looks right to me. I'm going to use some glue. You glue my pieces down, and then I realized I want this one to face down so the marker can't be seen. And there you have your 3 motifs that are very similar, and I worked on the composition. Now I'm going to add some details using markers. And then a border. All done.
Sophie TaeuberArp was also very humorous. Here are 2 photos that I found that I thought sort of expresses that. The first one is she was a costume designer, so this is one of her wearing one of her costumes. And the second one, in an application, she was asked to send in a photo of herself, and she sent in a photo of herself, but also covered half her face with one of her wooden sculpture mannequins that she made of a face. So that to me makes me think of her. She must have been quite a funny person to know in person. Her work also had reduced geometric vocabulary, which pretty much means that you're creating a new language using colors, shapes, and lines. But let's go back to the word reduced geometric vocabulary. What does reduced mean? When you talk about reduced, it means that it has less detail, less ornamentation. For example, here's a picture of Sophie TaeuberArp, and on the right, you see her sculpture of a face. And the difference between the 2 is that the one on the right has less detail, less ornamentation. So it has it's reduced down to its geometric shapes. Her features are. So this brings us to our next activity, to create a simplified version of a more complex item. So for example, this is one of her tapestries here on the right, and it is to represent a bunch of people together, similar to the images on the left. And as you can see, again, it's a reduced geometric pattern where it's these complicated shapes on the left were reduced down or simplified or have less ornamentation, but it still represents the group of people. So that's going to be our activity number 2. You're going to choose one of these images that you see below, and we're going to reduce a very complex figure like the ones you see below, and you're going to use a black marker to draw a more simplified version of the image you see. So in my example, I'm going to choose this house, and I'm going to create a reduced geometric drawing of the house, again, which means less detail, less ornamentation. So let's start.
So remember, we are going to draw one of those images in a simplified form. So I'm not going to worry about details. I'm just going to be using some simple shapes and lines. All done.
Sophie TaeuberArp was quoted as saying, "The desire to enrich and beautify things cannot be interpreted materialistically. That is, in the sense of increasing their value as possessions. Rather, it stems from the instinct for perfection and the creative act." So let's look at the words. Let's break up some of these words just to understand her quote a little bit. Materialistic. Let's see. What kinds of things do people own that have materialistic value? For me, the things that I own that have materialistic value is like my car, maybe some of my necklaces, my wedding ring. Those are things that have materialistic value. And think of one thing you own, which is very valuable to you, but not anyone else. Like, why is it valuable to you? Why is it less valuable to others? Let me think. So one thing that I own that is not valuable to anyone else would be like my kids' pictures from when they were babies. That has value to me, but it has no materialistic value to anyone else, because I know my own kids and other people's parents, other kids' parents might not really care for my kids' baby pictures. So that is the opposite of something that might be materialistic value. So let's go back to the quote. So again, knowing that materialistic means money oriented or something that everyone can appreciate monetarily, she's saying the desire to enrich and beautify things cannot be interpreted by things that can be bought with money. So only in making things beautiful do we increase their value. It's sort of like the creative act of working with something is what increases its value. So for example, let's bring it down to an explanation or an example in talking about increase and decreasing values of things that we own. Does decorating something you own increase its value? If yes, why or how? So for example, if I had a sketchbook or a composition book, for example, and then I went ahead and like decorated it like this book on the right, which one do you think would be more valuable to me? Yes, the one on the right would be more valuable to me because I spent my time on it. I made it really beautiful to me. I used maybe my favorite flower, my favorite animal. I made it so that it's different and special to me personally. So here again, showing how the creative act of taking something that you own and sort of putting some creativity into it increases its value. Okay, so Sophie TaeuberArp has been described as being very precise. And before we move forward on sort of looking at some of her work more, I want you to understand that word and how that came about. So what is the opposite of precise? Sometimes it's easier to learn the definition of something if we learn the opposite. So what is the opposite of precise? The opposite of precise, so this drawing on the left is precise, and this drawing on the right is not precise. So precise would mean something that is neat, that has maybe very carefully done, and the image on the right is very messy. So opposite of precise would be messy or something that's done sort of like haphazardly. So what types of tools do you suppose Sophie TaeuberArp used to make her precise drawings? Let's see. And that will lead us to our third activity. And let's look at some of the tools first she used in her works on paper and canvas. To be precise, she used a compass, she used a ruling pen, and a straight edge. So a straight edge meaning like a ruler. So these are just fancy words for compass, a pen, and a ruler. So that's what you're going to be using. Today, you're going to be using a compass, a pencil. You can use a mechanical pencil or regular pencil or sharpened pencil if you want, and any type of ruler you have available to you. And what you're going to do for this project is you're going to just take a piece of paper and see what kind of designs and lines and interesting shapes you can make with the ruler and the compass and the pencil. If you want, you can feel free to use markers or coloring pencils to later fill in some of these shapes. Remember what a shape is versus a line. A shape is a space that has an inside and an outside. A line is a shape that has not yet met, but when the ends of a line meet, that's a shape. So you might want to use your pencils, coloring pencils, markers, or even watercolors if you have to decorate these further. Let's get started.
So I move aside my tools and I'm going to be playing with a compass. It's a little bit awkward. You have to hold it down and then rotate the paper. Then I'm going to use my ruler to make some straight lines crossing that circle. When you make yours, you don't have to copy mine. You can play around with the compass differently. You can make different kinds of lines. This is just an example of how you can play around with the different tools to make interesting marks on your paper. The compass is holding a pencil, so then I use a marker to draw in the lines that I want to emphasize. And I really should be going a little slower. And I'm just going by feel here. I did not start out knowing what I needed to do. On this side, I decided it looks much easier to do it with a ruler. And then I decided to color in a pattern. And you don't need markers. You can use colored pencils. You can use one color marker or a Sharpie. Whatever it is you have around the house will be fine. The wonderful thing about working with these tools is that you don't really need to think while you're working. You just go by feel. You could be listening to the radio, listening to your favorite song, and just working on your art. So I decided to go ahead and try to make some more lines with the compass. And if you haven't worked with a compass before, it is so much fun. This is one of the first times I've worked with it, and I cannot get enough of it. It's a really fun tool. So I'm overlapping some semicircles there, and I'm liking what's going on. Again, I didn't start out knowing what I was going to do. And it reminds me of either the sun or a flower. Or seed. All done.
So, as you might know by now, Sophie TaeuberArp was very multi-talented. What does multi-talented mean? Multi-talented means that you have lots of talent in different things. All of us are multi-talented. Can you list 3 things that you are multi-talented at? The things that I'm multi-talented is I love to write. I've been writing since I was like 9. I used to journal write, and then I just love writing, and it helps me process my thoughts. And then I also love making collages. I love working in collage. And lately I've realized I really enjoy making print, using printmaking. And I'm not very good at it, but I'm thinking if I stick with it for a while and I try it consistently, I will become more talented in it. So she's also been described as having radical flexibility, and that's pretty intense description. So let's break that down to understand what that means. And radical flexibility, radical, why radical? Radical means revolutionary, revisionist. It means that she really changed the way people looked at things. And flexibility, let's think about that word. Flexibility means versatile. Here is the word flexibility, or versatile means to be able to do lots of things easily. And it doesn't frustrate you to do one type of media and then change to another, that she was able to fluently move from one media to another. So she was versatile, which means able to adapt or be adapted to many different functions or activities. All these works that you see up here are her works, from the purse with the beaded purse to the gouache painting to the sculpture. She was able to move into these different medias without any difficulty. She was very flexible. So let's talk a little bit about this flexibility and why that was so radical. Again, radical is something that was let's look at the word radical again, revolutionary. And why was it revolutionary? It was revolutionary because she was bridging these two divides. There was a divide of applied arts and fine arts. And when you bridge two divides, these two divides were very separated. Let's look at what that means. So the two worlds are the major arts and the minor arts, or the applied arts or the fine arts. And the fine arts being the major arts and the applied arts being the minor arts. When we look at her body of work, her work invites us to think that we might need to revisit these categories of major art and minor art. And again, major art would be like paintings and drawings and marble sculptures, and minor arts would be things that you might use in your kitchen or have as a decorative item in your home. And those two things were seen as very separate. They were labeled and valued separately. So again, the fact that she was able to intertwine these things, she's inviting us to now rethink these labels and rethink how we value them. Let's look at the list of all the different things that she did. She was innovative in many disciplines. So she was an applied arts teacher. She designed textiles, which is another word for tapestry. She did beadwork. She made costumes. She was a dancer. She designed murals. She drew. She made puppets. She was an architect. She painted. She was a sculptor. I already said murals. She designed furniture, interior designer, illustrator. She was an editor to a magazine. She designed stained glass windows, and she did some geometric abstractions. And again, let's look at some of those examples. So as you see from this list, she was an interdisciplinary artist. And interdisciplinary is a very important word, which means relating to more than one branch of knowledge. She was knowledgeable in all these different branches. So let's look at this. Here we go. Interdisciplinary. She was dancer, architect, painter, furniture designer, puppet maker, clothing designer, sculptor. She worked with beads. So in the way that she worked, she did not see barriers between mediums. Barriers just means walls. So there was, in that world, at that time, when she lived at that time, applied arts was here, painting was here, sculpture was here, and they're all in their own separate categories. She did not see these categories as separate. She saw them as not having barriers and kind of all blended together. So here it is, no walls between them, as here. So let's talk about her being an applied arts teacher. And she was quoted as saying, it's only when we go into ourselves and attempt to be entirely true to ourselves will we succeed in making things of value. And I love that idea for opening up the world of art to students. So I feel that too. I'm an art teacher, and I think that only when we sort of like ask ourselves what we care about, are we able to be true to ourselves and make art that has value to us. And then, of course, to everyone else, because we're going to be making things that are so unique because they mirror what we really value and appreciate. She used a lot of icons in her work, and let's look at some of these in her work. And icons mean simple images used in context to communicate something. So an icon is just a simplified image, and it has a meaning. So let's look at some of these icons. Can you identify even two of these icons and what they might mean? Let me see. I know the share icon right here, and then I see one that's for mail. And I actually know a lot more of these than I thought I did. Settings icon, and a walking and a running icon, and a bicycling icon. So we know quite many icons already, which leads us to our fourth activity today. We are going to use personally meaningful icons in our art. So you're going to look at the list I just showed you, this one, and you're going to pick 2 or 3 different icons that mean something to you. Again, remember, art is something that's personally meaningful to the artist. So that's why I want you to come up with, pick 2 or 3 that matter to you. I'm going to pick 2 or 3 that matter to me. And then I'm going to choose a limited palette. Limited palette just means that you're going to choose 2 or 3 of your colors, favorite colors at the time. And they might not be the same colors every day. I mean, you might change every day. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to pick 2 or 3 of your favorite colors now, and you're going to use the 2 or 3 icons you chose to create art on a blank piece of paper where your icons might overlap. You might thicken some of the lines. You might use them repeatedly. You might make a pattern. So you're just going to keep using your icons to make some kind of an interesting composition on your paper. So you ready?
I'm going to use my phone as a resource and pick 3 icons that I want to use. I'm going to use the share icon. And then I chose the planet icon, which is pretty simple to draw. Interestingly enough, I've never drawn it. And then my last icon, I wanted it to be a star. And remember, the assignment is to create some patterns or use those same icons over and over on your paper in a way that's creative. So I decided to use the share icons below as sort of a border at the bottom in sort of a straight line. And then use some of the planet icons above in a straight line. And I'm going to put the star icons all around in the main areas, but in smaller sizes. Again, you could have chosen another whole different set of icons. This is what I did. I actually really like the way it looks. All done.
Okay, so now let's look at some of her sculptures. These are some of her sculptures. She had these abstracted heads that she made. And again, we talked about the abstracted heads are where things are more geometric and they're reduced detail. They're reduced down to very basic shapes. And these are kind of hard to categorize. They might be a toy, they might be a sculpture or a mask, might be a mannequin head. And she also made a different type of a sculpture called relief. and where some of the major cutouts are pulled out, it looks like. And with reliefs, they're sort of laying flat on the wall, and then something will come out of the base. So this will lead us to our fifth activity, which is we're going to use simple shapes to create an abstracted head. And we're going to play around with shapes by stacking. And the way that I find some interesting shapes is I save the tops to my bottles and my my laundry soap container top is really cool. So I save all those, and those are not only are they very colorful, but they're interesting shapes. Or my water bottle tops, those are really interesting too. So go and find a couple of those, and you're going to stack them to create an abstracted head. Remember, abstracted head is not a very detailed head, right? So you don't need to have eyelashes or that mole on your face or wrinkles or any of that. You're just basically reducing down the face to just basic shapes like ovals and circles and semicircles and things like that. So, and then you're going to use, you might want to use a flat base. I like cardboards as my flat base. So you can use anything you have around the house that's flat. Just make sure you have permission to use these things. And then I love, if you're going to be using the plastic tops, like I just suggested, you might want to use tacky glue, which is very good at holding together plastics. So we're gonna get started. I'm kind of excited to see what kind of abstracted head you make. We did talk about reliefs, and let's define it a little further. The term relief refers to a sculptural method in which the sculpted piece are bonded to a background of the same material. So the term relief is from the Latin verb relevo, which means to raise. So to create a sculptural relief is to give the impression that the sculpted material has been raised above from the background plane. So these are just some examples of reliefs, sculptures, which brings us to our sixth activity. So we're going to now choose the same type of cardboard for our background, but instead of having the cardboard standing up on the table, we're going to be thinking of it how it's going to look on a wall. And we're going to choose recycled materials again and create a composition of one layer of those lids from different containers and maybe toy parts, and glue the pieces in the cardboard, not overlapping them. And of course, you can paint them afterwards if you want, but some of these pieces you see are very colorful already. So glue them down and you will create a relief sculpture. You guys start. I am so excited to get started. Sophie TaeuberArp also used fabricators to help her create her work. So for example, for this sculpture, she might have used someone who knew how to work with wood. So she would draw the designs out and they would create it for her. And they're called fabricators. She was also a puppet maker. So here are some examples of her puppets. Again, these are very similar to each other in terms of like how simple they are. They have a limited palette. The puppets with the strings are called marionettes. And the strings are attached to the appendages, which is just a fancy word for legs or arms. What type of puppets do you know? I mean, we've all seen puppets. What types of puppets do you know? I thought of just one, like a hand puppet when I did this, but then when I Googled it, I came up with so many others. Look, there's like finger puppets, there's shadow puppets, there's the hand puppet that I thought of, the stick puppet, and then of course the marionette puppet. So what does this sculpture remind you of? This is one of Sophie TaeuberArp's sculpture. And what does this sculpture remind you of? I was thinking it reminded me of a robot because of the color, but it's interesting how you can kind of turn it around and it probably looks like it's the front anywhere you are because it's circular. And also because it has like a sword, it looks like in each hand. So it does remind me a lot of a soldier. Was that what you were going to say? So now this leads us to our seventh activity. We're going to create a puppet. You might have to pause the video and then come back to, but here are the things that you might need. And the most important part of creating a puppet, especially a marionette puppet, is these little eye hooks that you see on the right, and also wire. Now, if you don't have wire, like aluminum wire, like I have here, you can also use bread ties, but for sure, you're going to be needing some different types of wood. And if you go to the craft store or Michael's or any kind of art store, they will have like boxes of little wooden pieces that you can use. And you also would need probably a grown-up to help you screw these eye hooks in to the pieces. So what you're going to do is you're going to sketch out your puppet on your paper and make sure that the pieces are the pieces you have. So you might want to look at your pieces first and see what's available. And then you're going to lay out your puppet like on a piece of paper, lay out your pieces so you see where the pieces connect. And then you're going to place the screws, the eye screws, where there will be the connections. And you can use the wire to connect them. So that way the arm is able to bend, or if you have them connected here, you would need, then the head would turn. So I'm going to be making a puppet too. So we're going to do it together. And I can't wait to start.
I put out my pieces in what would look like a puppet, and then I drew them out. It's good to know what pieces you have so that you can easily plan. Then I got my eye hooks, and with the help of a grown-up, I'm going to get these hooks into the wood. First, I'm going to put little dots on where the hooks are going to end up going. I'm going to show you one example of how the two pieces might connect. You use something heavy or a hammer. Again, you're definitely going to need the help of a grown adult to help you put these screws in. Now I'm going to put the screw in the second one, which is the body. Screw it in. And then I'm going to use a tie, like a bread tie or some kind of wire to connect them. And I had to play around a little bit because the first time I did it, it was very loose. So I had to go ahead and tighten it a little more so that the neck doesn't look like it's so far away from the body. A lot of this is just experimenting. So here's just one connection, and then I'm going to work on the others. So the screws are going to go in all these different locations, and I'm going to need around 9 of them.
So Sophie TaeuberArp was also a painter. She used, these are all, you can probably tell her work apart now from anyone else, because again, she used a lot of these motifs, repetitive motifs, these very basic shapes, reduced abstracted shapes in her work. And she was also a costume designer. So here is some samples of the costumes that she designed. And again, like I think they're kind of funny, like they're a little bit funny. If I were to wear one, I think I would be smiling, or my friends would be smiling too, because they are very funny and interesting. So this one was made to go along with a poem, and I'm including the link to the poem below if you want to see it. And the costume was meant to be moved with the sound of this poem by Hugo Ball, which is one of the founders of the Dada movement. So, and there's probably tons of videos about Dada movement, so you can definitely Google that. But the poem is not anything you would recognize with, the words are all just sort of mumbo jumbo words, just to call it what it is. But it is very interesting to play the words and see the movement and maybe move together. So that would be an interesting project for sure. So what are we going to do next? We're going to create a costume using paper bags and newspapers. This is going to be fun, guys. I am dying to see what I make with this. So to create your costumes, you're going to need a couple of brown bags and some newspaper and masking tape, scissors, and some working markers. And I say working markers because in my classroom, they're all dried out. So you need some markers that work, because it's going to be hard to kind of draw over things if it's sort of fading. So I'm excited to see what kind of costumes I'm going to make. I'm going to go ahead and probably draw out my idea first, and then I'm going to go ahead and execute it. You guys excited? Let's see.
I decided instead of creating an entire costume for my body, I was going to create headdress. And I think that's a little bit more manageable. And I'm going to use newspapers to create my headdress or hat. Something that goes on my head for sure. So here, I really like the way this fan looks. And then I realized that I needed to take some tape out first. And again, art making is a lot about just learning from your mistakes. So I wrapped up my fan and I'm going to put it aside. Next, I'm going to make the band that's going to be going around my head. And then when I put it around my head, it wasn't long enough, so I had to do 2 bands. And this might look better if the tape was actually tan, but I didn't have it. Again, you use what you have, not a big deal. And then I folded it onto itself. This is my second band. This time I was smart and I put something heavy on top so it won't unfold. And there you go. I have my second band. I'm going to connect them together. And I realized one of them is a little thicker and I had to kind of work with that too. Again, it's a lot of it's just working with your mistakes, and that's okay. So now I'm putting it around my head to see how it fits. I got the right size. I'm going to tape it. And then there's a little extra, and we could have even cut it, but I decided I'm going to actually use it into my design. See that little extra part? I'm going to fold it, tape it down so that it pipes up, and maybe that will help me with my fan. Again, I didn't have a plan for this. I just kind of went with it, and a lot of art making is just exploring, learning from your mistakes. You have to be comfortable with making the mistakes when you're an artist, because otherwise you'll never move anywhere, because you're going to be making lots of mistakes, but they're fun mistakes. So here I played with it quite a bit to see how I can adjust it so that the fan part is visible from the back and the front. And it's, there you go. There is my headdress. I think it looks great.
So Sophie TaeuberArp was also an interior designer, and here is an example of her design on the ceiling and the walls of this location. She did a drawing before she painted on the walls, and I don't know if you noticed, but this drawing feels like it could go either way, like we're either above it or we might be next to it. It's a little strange. And that kind of drawing is called an axonometric drawing, which is a 3-dimensional drawing that has no perspective, really. Like you could be standing. I mean, it looks like we might be under it, or sometimes on the side of it, or on top of it. So it does kind of confuse us. And that is purposeful. It's meant for you to sort of be able to see it from all different directions. People were not used to this design. There was very little ornamentation. So a couple of years went by and they painted over it because they didn't understand her language, and because it wasn't ornate. Ornate just means something that has a lot of decoration, like these reliefs and the jewelry and the drawing of the flowers on the left. So in this design right here, she used a lot of more simple shapes, not ornamental. So people didn't understand her language quite yet, and they were used to a more ornamental style. So they were used to something which a lot more detail, a lot busier. So this makes me think of like feelings. Like I really kind of want to talk about feelings a little bit. Do you remember a time you made art and not everyone liked it? Like, and how did that make you feel? And then how did you deal with it? Like, did you make changes to your work? Why or why not? So I have a story. When I first started painting, I made a bunch of paintings of people that I really, really liked. I had these giant paintings and they were just, you might be too young for this, but I loved Oprah. And I made this giant painting of Oprah Winfrey and I loved it. And I couldn't understand why nobody else was as excited about this painting as I was. And I ended up keeping it because it just always made me feel very good seeing it. So sometimes we do make art and not everyone understands it, and that's okay. As long as we're benefiting from it, I think it's very important that we continue to make art that feeds our heart. The next thing she also did was furniture making. And here's a quote: always distinguish between the essential and the inessential. The object of it and its purpose are the primary thing. Ornament must in every case be subordinate to form. So she created these modular furniture. Modular means that these pieces can kind of be moved around because they're so similar. Like, for example, the yellow part can go on top of the red and the red can go all the way on top. If you wanted it, you can move things around. So that's what modular means. But let's look at her quote again. She says that the primary thing, primary means most important, the primary thing is its purpose. So when you're designing something, you should be thinking about its purpose before you think about ornamentation or how pretty it is. So think about its reason for being more important than like its decoration. And that's sort of, you could tell from looking at her furniture that she was thinking more of purpose and definitely less like ornamentation was at the bottom of like what was important to her. And again, I wanted to really quickly emphasize primary. When someone says primary, it means that it's really important. And that was really important for her was the purpose of the furniture. Like, what was the reason for this furniture to be in that space? And what did it do? So she attended dance school where she met her husband. And here we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration. At that time, women artists were very rare. And it wasn't because there were no women artists, but because the world did not see women as artists. They did collaborate a lot together on activities and produced a lot of work together. And collaborated just means when you work together jointly on an activity to produce or create something. Which brings me to our next activity. We're going to be collaborating with someone to design and make a miniature modular furniture. And again, we're going to think about what is the most important aspect of the furniture making is its function. So we're not going to worry about adding like decorations or details. We're going to think about what is the purpose of this furniture and making sure that it meets that purpose. And we're going to be using popsicle sticks and cardboard and scissors and glue. And if you have tape, maybe tape too, to create our furniture. Are you guys ready to start? I'm ready to start. Let's go. I'm not sure what I'm going to make, but I'm going to make sure that it is its function matches my design.
So I didn't have popsicle sticks, but I did have pieces of wood. And so I stacked them up to make a shelf. And the way that I made it modular is that the pieces that held up the shelves then became the legs of a table, and it became like a picnic table.
And during this time, they were in a place where they were lacking resources. A lot of things were going on, and she made a lot of drawings. And financially, during World War II, things were very rough and the resources were scarce, which means there's not a lot of those resources. So materials like art materials, like maybe the wood, maybe the glue, maybe those things were not available. So drawing was probably easier. And also the lines that she made signify how she might have felt during that time, sort of all wound up, like if you have shoelaces and they're all looking like this, what would you think? I mean, would you be frustrated? Right. It would, it's just, it's all messy, and it's sort of causes a lot of frustration, right? So when you make your lines like that, it might communicate that, things were very convoluted during that time. Which brings us to our next activity. We're going to look around the house and find some type of paper that's not traditionally for art. And it could be receipts, it could be a brown bag, it could be maybe some papers that were sent to you and your family recycled. It could be pages from a magazine, it could be a newspaper page. So I want you to think outside the box as far as paper. Just think paper and do a walk around your house and collect those types of different paper. And then you're going to find a drawing material, and it can be anything. It could be markers, it could be pens, it could be oil pastels, coloring pencils, it could be all of them. And you're going to draw on these materials, on these papers with the materials. And just, it doesn't really matter what you draw, but I think it's important to sort of understand that sometimes as artists, we are limited by our materials, and we might not have the materials we need, but we can still create using the materials that we have in our possession and still create great work.
The pieces that I had were this ledger, paper, envelopes, and a newspaper. So I decided I was going to go ahead and explore. And drawing on a envelope is actually pretty fun because it's this nice small paper format. And I made a cat. Then I realized that the ledger has these cool lines, and that it reminded me of when we used to practice handwriting in school. And I also wanted to take advantage of the boxes. So a lot of times the paper itself has these marks that can help you in your art making. So I decided to make some dashes. Very cool. Next, I wanted to draw with a very dark marker on a newspaper, but I wanted to find an area in the newspaper that wasn't completely covered. So I cut it out, and I love the gray feel of this paper, and then I used a dark marker to draw. I like the results.
Here are some more examples of the works that she created on using just drawing materials and paper. Again, during that time, lots of people were struggling to even find food. So can you imagine, you're not going to go out and go to Michael's and get oil pastels because you didn't really, if you're hungry, that's the last thing you're thinking about is buying art supplies, or there's not going to be any. During this time, she also drew a lot of landscapes, and it's thought that she made lots of landscapes because they were more grounding. And she also traveled around during this time. Let's look at some of her textiles. And she used grids to organize her textile designs. And grids are just like these little spaces that are all squares. And let's see what else. And she was very precise. And again, one of the reasons why she was very precise, she was thinking a lot about her composition. Composition, again, is the way in which a whole is made up. And she was very, very interested in her positive and negative shapes, and always move things around so that those shapes are in balance. And let's review a little bit about what that means. So let's look at this chair, and the positive space is the chair. So anything black on the chair is the positive space. The negative spaces are those white spaces in between our main drawing or a main item on the page. And even the space around the chair that doesn't have an arrow on it, that is also a negative space. So notice this is one of her works, and it used, there's an interplay here of positive and negative spaces, almost like it could be flipped, and you would think that the black pieces were added on versus the white. So it's like this interesting balance. So for our next activity, we're going to be working with positive and negative shapes to create a balanced composition. So what you're going to do is you're going to layer 4 pieces of paper. You're going to cut out an interesting shape. The papers do not have to be the same color. And then I want you to put these 4 shapes that are similar on another paper color that's not the same color, and move them around until you have a balanced composition. Remember, a balanced composition does not have to be a composition that feels right to everyone. It just has to feel right to you. And you might have to change things around a little bit until your negative space and your positive space feel like they are in balance. And again, that's going to be up to you. She was also a magazine editor, and she connected with artists of all continents. Because of the war, people were moving around quite a bit, trying to escape conflicts in different places. And she met lots of friends in Switzerland. The magazine that she created was in 3 languages: English, French, and German. And there was a lot of collaboration during this time, kind of like during the pandemic, where people were forced to kind of work together to come up with interesting projects. She was part of the Avantgarde, and Avantgarde means a person or work that is experimental, radical, or unorthodox with respect to art, culture, or society. It is frequently characterized by aesthetic innovation and initial unacceptability. So pretty much it means that they were coming up with a lot of new ideas in the arts that were experimental and, again, radical. And we already know what radical means. So let's talk a little bit about women in the arts in the earliest 20th century.
Next, we are going to be making a pattern, 3 of them actually. I folded my paper, I drew an invented shape, and then I cut it out. At the end, I'm going to have 3 shapes that are the same color. I got my background paper, and again, the background paper needs to be trimmed because I wanted the shapes to fit snugly in there so that there would be a balance between negative and positive space. So I'm going to cut it even smaller. And then I started to play around with the shapes, and notice that I'm like adjusting them so that the negative space and the positive space were balanced. And if you turn it around and you had them glued down, you could see that the negative spaces almost became positive spaces. Like they almost look like bird beaks. So I really like when the pieces touch, you play with them.
She never had a solo exhibition during her lifetime. Can you imagine, with all the work that she's done? She still never had a solo exhibition. And in the art world, the solo exhibition means that you are highlighted on your own in a space. And she never had that. Because again, women were not viewed as artists or as important artists as men were at that time. She did have a retrospective, which again is just a way of highlighting. Let's look at what the retrospective mean. Is an exhibition or compilation showing the development of the work of a particular artist over a period of time. So she did have a retrospective, but her applied arts practice was all but left out. Because again, we talked about the canon of the arts at that point was applied arts was here and fine arts was here. And the fine arts was the major arts, and then the applied arts was the minor arts. So only men were in museums at this point, and they also made just major arts. So anything with applied arts wasn't even considered art. So again, Sophie TaeuberArp challenged our notions of what fine art is versus craft, what major art is versus minor. And we're going to do our 13th activity, our last activity. We're going to be doing one more activity. We're going to be doing an activity together. We're going to combine major and minor arts forms.
So here I just take a regular brown bag and I am going to add art to it. The mere fact that I'm adding art to it gives it more value. Can you think of something that you own that's just meh, that would be a lot more exciting if you add art to it?
So our next activity is, so think about how would you combine major and minor art forms or applied and fine arts together. You can decorate a mug that you made, or you can frame a weaving you created using a loom. You can make friendship bracelets and then use them as handles for a purse you made. So these are just some examples of how you can combine major arts and minor arts. During that time, let's look at what the art world looked like. All over Europe, artists wanted to modernize life in all of its ways. The works spoke against dictatorial regimes such as Russia and Germany at the time. And so a lot of the artwork was more free-spirited and not restricted by ideology. And again, let's look at ideology and what that means. Ideology is a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. World art at the time was not restricted by a set of ideas. It was trying to be more free-spirited, break through some of these dictatorial regimes. Sophie TaeuberArp worked with a limited color palette, and I want you to practice using that. You can use your iPad, or you can use 2 or 3 markers and draw whatever it is you want using 3 colors only. And then you're going to color the entire thing, again, using those 3 colors only, and see how it goes. I'm kind of excited about this one. Let me start.
So I chose my 3 colors and I decided to draw something that I enjoy drawing very often, which is flowers. I love drawing flowers. And I decided to mix and match the colors, mix and match the stems. And there's something very eye-pleasing when you use a limited palette. What are you going to draw with your 3 colors?
Some final reflections on the artist, Sophie TaeuberArp. And to me, she taught me that I can be an artist my entire life, and I can bring my art to everything I do, not just one media. And the purpose of her art to me is just very joyful, and it's very pleasing to the eye. My favorite art from Sophie TaeuberArp has to be her marionettes. They are very exciting. Oh, and I think her close second would be her costumes. They're very interesting and different. And I would have loved to have seen her perform in her costume. And how has she inspired me as an artist? She has definitely inspired me as an artist, because now I just want to see what ways that I can combine a lot of my interests in art into my regular life, and how I can bring my art to the things that I own, and how I can make the things that I own more beautiful with my art. And here I'm going to share some more resources down below. Thank you so much. I hope you two are just as excited about Sophie TaeuberArp as I am. When I first saw her work, I could not believe all the work that she's created just over a short period of time. And if you have any comments, please share them below. And I'm really excited to be sharing this video with you. So see you later.